Hey, welcome to the OMG Tarot podcast. I'm your host, Lindsay, aka OMG Tarot. Today, we're following up our Knights episode with the Pages. This is part 2 in our 4-episode series about the court cards. I think discussing them in a series like this will make it easier for you to understand how they relate to each other and the nuanced differences between these 4 archetypes. So if the Knights symbolize teenagers and young adults, the Pages can be correlated with children. The perspective of a page is that anything is possible, and no idea is too crazy, and you don't really know how the world works, but eventually you'll figure it out. The way that I learned to conceptualize the court cards and the way that I teach my students is to think of them like the different roles in a family. Last time we talked about the Knights and how they're the teenagers, so they're rebellious and experiencing things for the first time and getting an early taste of independence, but also need some guidance from their parents and other older figures in their lives. Those parents and older figures are the king and the queen, who roughly correlate with the dad and the mom in the family. I'll speak more about each of these groups in the next episodes, but for now, just keep in mind that they're the adults in the room. They're the parents. They're the ones who know what they're doing and they have a lot of experience under their belts. All of the court cards, your pages, your knights, your queens, and your kings, symbolize people. And as we discussed in the previous episode, they can symbolize a role that you, the person pulling the cards, are being asked to fulfill, or they can symbolize the personalities that you're grappling with in a scenario that you're reading about. So let's talk a bit more about who the pages symbolize. As I mentioned, they symbolize children and a childlike spirit. So, while they can symbolize literal children, they can also symbolize adults who are maybe behaving a bit childish, or, to put a more positive spin on it, adults who are approaching a scenario with a childlike attitude. Maybe they feel like they're at the very baby steps stages of something that they're doing and they're just really getting their feet wet and getting acquainted. Or perhaps they're purposely taking on this very open eyed, open minded, childlike sense of wonder because they want to be open to anything. They could symbolize an adult who feels like a child in a situation. Maybe, to give an example, let's say you're 26 years old and you just got your realtor's license. In order to successfully build your book of business and start getting leads and referrals and clients, you need to go to in-person networking events. So you go to the networking event, business cards in hand, very excited to start meeting people and rubbing elbows and building out that network, and you get there and you are the youngest person in the room by at least a decade. That doesn't say anything about your competence or your potential, but it can be very easy in that situation to feel like, oh, I just stepped into the big leagues. And it can be easy to feel like a kid in a room full of adults, especially if some of these adults have been running their businesses for as long as you've been alive or close to it. That's one way page energy can show up for an adult, and it's actually a way I've seen it show up in a number of readings. I think that when you pull a page, one of the most important things to keep in mind is that there's a lot of potential here and there's a lot of growth that will happen down the road, and we're seeing the very beginning stages of it. In a way, pages have kind of similar energy to the Fool. In both cases, they're unencumbered and they're enthusiastic, and they don't know what is going to befall them as they continue to move forward on the journey they're on, but they're moving forward and they're excited about where this is going to bring them. This is exciting. This is new. This is fun. A short and dirty way I often explain page energy is imagine how a kindergartner feels when they're going to school. They probably love it because to them, school is brand new and it's exciting and they haven't experienced the doldrums of day in and day out and the bells and the homework. They've never failed yet. They've never had to take a standardized test or dealt with anything really negative in the school setting yet. They're simply getting acquainted with that setting and they're excited to be there. Then contrast that with the knight. If the page is a young kid, the knight, like I said, is like a teenager. And by the time you're in high school, you've gone to the school of hard knocks. Even if you're academically inclined, even if you love school, you've probably failed before. You've probably faced social difficulties. You've probably faced difficult teachers or teachers who felt like they had it out for you. You've taken your lumps, and you've got a more nuanced, critical perspective. So, just like with the nights, where we interpret each individual night by combining that night energy with the suit of the night we're currently looking at, we do the same thing with the pages. So, there are 4 pages, one for each of the 4 suits, and they each apply this whimsical, childlike energy to the specific area of life that corresponds with their suit. So, since I have them at the top of my deck, let's take a look at the Page of Cups. And now I'm using the pronoun him because on the Rider-Waite-Smith deck, it's depicting who appears to be a young man. However, it's important to keep in mind that gender really doesn't matter a whole ton with the court cards. I know I spoke about this in the most recent episode, but I just want to reiterate again here. A page can absolutely symbolize a woman, and in a lot of decks, we have young girls and young women as our pages. In fact, in some decks, notably decks that follow the Golden Dawn system, which the most common decks that follow this are the Thoth deck and the Hermetic deck, they, instead of a page, they have a princess, and instead of a knight, they have a prince. And I'm not well versed enough in the Golden Dawn system to speak to whether gender is more important in that system versus our Rider-Waite-Smith cards. If anyone listening can enlighten me on this, feel free to say so in the comments or shoot me a DM on Instagram. I might also have a guest star on a future episode to talk more about the Golden Dawn system and how it differs from the Rider-Waite-Smith system, and it's something I'm personally interested in exploring more down the line, because I know there are certain pieces of symbolism worked into those cards that we don't necessarily see in the Rider-Waite-Smith deck, or at least that aren't made quite as explicit. For example, I know in that deck all the queens are seated to symbolize that they are the foundation of the castle, and by extension, the foundation of the family, or however your queen is showing up, and the princes are all in motion to symbolize their dynamism and movement. And yes, I know that's true in our Rider-Waite-Smith deck as well, but as far as I know, Golden Dawn symbolism takes things a little further in certain directions and makes certain things more explicit. So, our pages. Let's talk more about the Page of Cups. We've got this young man standing on what appears to be a solid yellow ground with some waves behind him, and he's focused on a cup that has a fish poking out of it, and they look like they're engaged in a conversation. This kid's got flowers all over his tunic, and in those flowers we see that same red and white color palette that we saw in the Magician and a few other major arcana cards, once again bringing together that sense of innocence plus passion. And as our emotionally connected, happy go lucky kid here, because he's not crying or anything, he looks like he's having a nice time hanging out with this fish, I'd say, well, he cares about what he's feeling and he's engaged with it in a very pure kind of way. He's not analyzing his emotions, he's simply feeling them. And right now, he's feeling really good and giddy about hanging out with this fish. I think the Page of Cups is a real sweetheart. I think this is the one who's a lover, not a fighter, and this is the one who really loves animals. And if they were to find, say, an injured bird on the playground, the Page of Cups would be the kid who takes care of it and puts it up in a nice little box with some straw and some water and a worm and nurses it back to health. When you pull the Page of Cups, that's the kind of energy you're dealing with. You're dealing with sweet energy. You might be being asked to embrace that role and to lean into a kind, friendly, happy-go-lucky persona. Or, if we're doing a reading and the Page of Cups shows up to symbolize somebody else, you're probably dealing with an innocent sweetheart. However, I don't want to cast the pages as without any negative qualities, and let's say the Page of Cups comes up in a reading. You might also be dealing with an adult who's perhaps a bit childish and perhaps a bit childlike in their emotions. Maybe it could be someone who's a bit emotionally immature, or perhaps someone who lacks self-awareness because they just go with what feels good. If I were to compare the Page of Cups to any well-known cartoon character, I might cast him as Steven from Steven Universe. Steven, if you are familiar with that show, is really just a sweet kid who always is trying to make things better socially. He cares about the people around him, and he's very empathetic and emotionally intuitive. And I know that goes against our reading of the Page of Cups as emotionally immature, and I would say there's some nuance, and there's context in tarot. That the Page of Cups, when describing a literal child, could be describing a child who's very empathetic and very into their emotions, but you take that same level of emotional development and apply it to an adult, and you might have an adult who's perhaps coming across as a bit stunted. Let's move on to our next page, the Page of Swords. Taking a look at the Page of Swords in our Rider-Waite-Smith deck, we see a figure who's in a more dynamic looking pose than our Page of Cups. This individual, with their long ponytail flapping there in the wind, is curved and looking over their shoulder, holding up a tall sword that's pointing directly at the sky. This page is standing on a hill, and we can see over in the background on the left-hand side there's a few trees that seem to be blowing under a high wind, and then over on the right there's some mountains. In the background we see clouds, lots of clouds, and up at the top there's a flock of birds in the sky. As you know, the swords are all about mental acuity, and they're all about knowledge and facts and brain power. That's what this page leans all the way into. The Page of Swords is a thinker and a questioner and a problem solver. This is the kid who probably is in the enrichment class at school. They definitely enjoy a good debate, and nothing excites them more than expanding their mind and learning something. This is the kid who you could bring to the museum and they'll actually enjoy it. But I also see a bit of combativeness here. Take a look at this page's pose and the way that they're holding the sword. They definitely are looking for a debate, and I think that this can sometimes come off as some know-it-all energy, and perhaps this sense of, I'm the smartest one in the room, I'm the best. And I think this is where that page immaturity comes into play. That the Page of Swords is absolutely smart. They definitely are a critical thinker, they are a questioner, they are a mental explorer, but they don't yet have the maturity to recognize when is that appropriate and how is that appropriate to apply. They might be the one who engages in a debate for the sense of wanting to feel superior. But they're definitely precocious, and I think they're someone who is willing to work hard and ask uncomfortable questions in order to learn skills and just become a smarter, more well rounded person. To compare the Page of Swords to a well known cartoon character, initially I was thinking Lisa Simpson, but I don't think she really has that combativeness to her. But in terms of the intelligence and the willing to stand out from the crowd and stand for what she knows, I think that's absolutely some Page of Swords behaviors from Lisa Simpson. Otherwise, maybe Jimmy Neutron, maybe Dexter from Dexter's Laboratory, maybe Stewie Griffin. Next up, we've got our Page of Wands. Let's take a look at this page. Our central figure is standing tall with their gaze pointed upward toward the top of their wand, which they're treating like a tall walking stick. Take note of how this wand is taller than our page. Perhaps we can interpret this as maybe their ambition is a bit bigger than they are. Maybe their ambition and their drive is bigger than life, or bigger than they really have the capacity to pull off at this stage. Because our Page of Wands, like everything else in the wand suit, is all about drive and passion and what am I doing? What actions am I taking? And take a look at this fabulous little page. They're all decked out in beautiful golden clothing. They've got a bunch of salamanders printed all over their tunic, and they've got this neat little white hat with that red feather up at the top that kind of feels like a mini version of the red feather that's cascading down the Knight of Wands. This page's background is drier and more desert-like. We see them standing on a sandy ground with pyramids in the background, or maybe they're mountains. In any case, this page's focus is on scaling. Their gaze is pointed up, and if those are mountains, well, those are just challenges to scale and overcome. And if they're pyramids, well, same thing. We actually see quite a bit of pyramid imagery on the Wands court cards. We see it on the Knight, and we see it on the Queen, as well as on the page. And in tarot, some people believe that pyramids symbolize regrowth and rebirth. And think about that for a moment. A pyramid is a tomb, and it's not just a tomb, but it's a tomb and a memorial to a very important person, and they're linked with the concept of being resurrected in the afterlife and coming back. So let's think about that in the context of the wands. Why do we think that pyramids might be specifically depicted in the Wands court cards? I think it's kind of interesting that Pamela Coleman Smith didn't choose to depict the pyramids on the death card, because that feels like a very death card theme to me. Perhaps it's symbolizing the will and the passion needed to be able to make a comeback and to resurrect yourself after a transformative experience. Because nothing really gets the Wands family down. If there's anything that I can say is consistent between the Page, the Knight, the Queen, and the King of Wands, it's that they're resilient. They come back. They're always back in action really quickly after any sort of setback. Setbacks don't exist to them. If I could name a cartoon character who I think has some big Page of Wands energy, maybe Dora the Explorer. She's always exploring and putting stuff in her backpack and getting herself through different obstacles. When the Page of Wands shows up in a reading, it might be saying to you to embrace a growth mindset and to not limit yourself and to not think too hard about the logistics and instead just go for it. You see a big obstacle? Well, just throw all of yourself at it and worry about the details later. It could symbolize let yourself play. Let yourself have fun. Let yourself have hobbies and passions and indulge in the things that make you happy and make you feel like you're doing something for yourself. It could also show up to symbolize, whether this is about somebody else or about you, somebody who's perhaps a bit short sighted. And similarly to how the Page of Cups can symbolize an adult who's maybe a bit emotionally immature, this could be an adult who's perhaps so singularly focused on what they care about and what they want that they're not looking at the logistics and that they're not being realistic, that they're kind of engaging and indulging in a very childish, childlike kind of way. So, again, this is where context is so important in tarot. Sometimes letting yourself be that playful child and indulging that inner child is absolutely the best thing for an adult, and it's really what you need. In other scenarios, no, it's not.
Uh-oh.
Lastly, we've got our Page of Pentacles. This page is standing on some very lush greenery with some cute little flowers down by their feet, and off in their background, they too have a mountain, and they too have trees. But these trees aren't windswept like the Page of Swords' trees are. These trees are calm, and they're just still. Perhaps there's a gentle breeze happening. And our page, just like the other pages, does have an upward gaze. But this page's upward gaze is focused on the large coin that they hold in their hands. Remember what Pentacles energy is. Pentacles are material things, they're assets, and they're the things that our material assets provide for us, like security and grounding and stability. And even when the pentacles are referring to things that aren't necessarily tangible, they're still referring to the things that anchor us down and make us feel secure. So things like being part of a community, or a sense of self discipline, or perhaps being motivated by a hobby or a discipline that gives you this sense of purpose and this sense of grounding in your day to day life. The page brings that innocent, childlike energy to this area of life. This page is the kid who probably has a lemonade stand and they probably mow lawns on weekends. And it's not just because they love money and they only want to buy material things, although they probably do like buying material things too. Like this kid's probably got a pretty sick video game collection, but they like the security that it provides and they're focused on the future. Unlike, say, our Page of Swords, who might perform well in school because they really like exercising their mental muscles, this one likes to do that because that's what they feel they're supposed to do, and getting good grades to them is partially an investment in their future, but also for them, it's a routine that makes them feel calm and safe. There's something very stabilizing about having a goal and having a purpose. I think this child might feel some intrinsic motivation toward responsibility. But are there shortcomings? Absolutely. The Page of Pentacles might be so deep in their comfort zone that they don't know how to explore outside of it. Shifting gears and trying new things might be pretty challenging for them because they know what they like and they know what they depend on, and there could be some short sightedness in the sense of really seeing the long term value of the things that they hold dear right here and right now. In a reading, the Page of Pentacles could point to that. It could be telling you that while you certainly have the things you value right now, it might be time to think bigger and go outside your comfort zone a bit, or that the person you're engaging with is doing those kinds of behaviors. It could also say it's time to take some baby steps in investing in your future, that you're maybe at the page stage and it's now time to open up a brokerage account and just throw 20 bucks a week in there, whatever you can, just to really start that nest egg growing, even if it seems small. You're just taking the little baby steps right now. Like all other Pentacles cards, the Page of Pentacles has slow moving energy. It has grounded energy. It's practical and responsible and down to earth, and it's willing to tell you when it doesn't think something is such a good idea. If I were to compare the Page of Pentacles to any cartoon character, I would say Chucky Finster. I think there's also an optimism in this card and a sense of, I'm being responsible now for delayed gratification later. And I get a lot of that optimism out of the color choices here. I think in a future episode, we might just talk more about colors and what they symbolize in various tarot cards, because color says a lot. And absence of color says a lot too, and some people have a very difficult time reading black and white decks for that exact reason. Others absolutely love black and white decks. There are a few notable black and white decks that I use. One of them is the Starstring Tarot. It's an absolutely super cool pen and ink line drawing style deck. And if you're looking to check out some new decks, check out that one. It was created by an artist named Eliza Kingsbury, so check her out on Instagram. You'll find the art and you'll see what I like so much about it. There's a lot of animals, and if anything, I think I tend to gravitate toward animal decks. I like animals. So that about wraps it up for our discussion on the pages today. I hope you learned something, and I hope that I've perhaps demystified some of the challenges about reading court cards, because if there's any one section of the deck that I consistently hear people say they have a difficult time with, it's the court cards. And I find that thinking of them as characters within this tableau of tarot is a really easy way to drop them into context and understand what they're communicating to you as the reader. So tune in next time for our following installment of this short court card series. We're going to be taking a closer look at the queens. And in the meantime, if you want to find me, just hit me up on Instagram. My handle is its_omg_tarot, or head over to my website, omgtarot.com. I'm going to be launching a newsletter soon, maybe, in September, perhaps. And if you want to get on that, drop your email address. I got a lot going on, and as we move into Q4, that's when business kind of tends to ramp up for tarot card readers, as you can probably imagine, or if you yourself are a reader, you probably experience. People want to have Halloween parties, and then they want to have holiday parties. But that sounds like something to think about when it actually is Q4. Otherwise, enjoy the rest of your day, and we will talk soon. Bye-bye.